Death Row Records was one of the most legendary labels in the history of West Coast hip-hop, but even though the label has some of the best rappers of all time, they only stayed on top for a few years. From gang war and torture to internal beef and death threats, this is the wild story of the rise and fall of Death Row. Death Row Records was created as a partnership between Dr. Dre and his former bodyguard, Suge Knight. Dr. Dre already had a name in the industry because of NWA, but by the early 90s, the crew was starting to fall apart. Other members of the group, like Ice Cube and Arabian Prince, had already left over contract disputes, and by 91, Dre was also having problems. NWA was signed to Eazy-E's Ruthless Records, which was co-founded by his manager Jerry Heller. Ice Cube and others accused Jerry of doing shady business and refusing to pay the group what they were worth. Even though Dre stuck it out longer than Ice Cube, eventually, he started to get tired of not having control over his career. So, that's when Dre first got the idea to partner with Suge. Suge was a former NFL player turned bodyguard and concert promoter. He grew up in Compton and became affiliated with the Mob Piru set of the Bloods. Suge was always a big dude at 6'2", 265 pounds, and played football at El Camino College and UNLV. He even had a short career in the NFL, but was dropped after only 2 games. After his football career didn't work out, Suge found work in the entertainment industry as a promoter and bodyguard for high-profile artists like Bobby Brown. But Suge wasn't satisfied just being a bodyguard and wanted to become a manager and executive too. So he started his own management company and signed artists like DJ Quick and the DOC. The DOC had worked with NWA, and Dr. Dre was his main producer. He was the one who first connected Dre with Suge, and soon they all started working together. He saw how unhappy he was in his deal with Ruthless and convinced him to leave NWA and partner up. Suge offered Dre part ownership in a new company and the creative freedom that Jerry Heller would never let him have. Eventually, Dre agreed, but there was only one problem. He still had a contract with Ruthless. So Suge agreed to help him get out of the deal and was willing to do whatever it took. That was one of the early signs that Death Row was bound to fail. Even though Suge did have good business sense, he brought a street mentality into the music industry and took what he wanted using violence and intimidation. Before starting Death Row, Suge got his reputation in the industry after allegedly hanging Vanilla Ice off a balcony. Suge had a client named Mario Jackson who claimed to have written parts of Vanilla Ice's breakout hit, Ice Ice Baby. Suge had confronted Vanilla Ice about it, but kept getting blown off. So, according to rumors, Suge went to his hotel room and hung Vanilla Ice off a balcony by his ankles until he agreed to sign some royalties over it. Vanilla Ice later denied that happened and said Suge only threatened him and that it was later resolved in court. Either way, Suge got a major payday from it and started building a feared reputation in the industry. Suge used the royalty money to start his own label with Dre. Together, they invested $250,000 and set up Future Shock Records, which later became Death Row Records. Everything was looking good, but they still needed to figure out how to get Dre out of his contract with Ruthless Records, and Suge knew exactly what to do. Suge used the same playbook that helped him get a check from Vanilla Ice and used violence to get exactly what he wanted. According to Jerry Heller and Eazy-E, Suge threatened to kill them if they didn't let Dre out of his contract. In addition to Dre, Suge also convinced Jerry to release the DOC and the singer, Michelet, who became the first artist to sign with Death Row. Eazy later sued Dre for breaking his contract and still kept some of his publishing rights. But Dre leaving the group basically ended NWA and sparked a beef between Dr. Dre and Eazy-E. Meanwhile, Suge got exactly what he wanted and found a way to separate Dre from his old group so he could focus on the future of Death Row Records. But from the start, things got sketchy and the label started falling apart fast. The label's first big project was a soundtrack to the movie Deep Cover. Dre made a track for the movie and featured Snoop Dogg, who had just signed to the label. Dre's first solo album, The Chronic, dropped later the same year, which was an instant classic and sold over 500,000 copies in the first week, proving Dre could stand on his own as a solo artist. Snoop was also featured heavily on the project, exposing the world to a future legend. So, with his first major release, Death Row already had a classic album and was in a good position to become the most dominant label on the West Coast. Fans were waiting for Snoop's solo album to drop next, but Death Row had a major setback after Snoop and his bodyguard got booked for murder before he could finish the project. They were involved in a situation where a rival gang member was shot and killed, and even though it was Snoop's bodyguard who pulled the trigger, they were both arrested and charged with first-degree murder. But they eventually beat the case after Snoop hired Johnny Cochran, the lawyer who defended O.J. Simpson. Snoop then dropped his debut project, Doggy Style, in November of 1993, which was another huge success and racked up over 800K sales in the first week. The murder case only created more hype around Snoop, and made fans want to go out and listen to the album. Death Row was gaining a reputation for being one of the most dangerous labels in the music business, and Suge knew how to market that image, but it was only a matter of time before the drama got out of control. With the success of Snoop and Dre, Suge proves he had an eye for talent, but he also knew that if he wanted Death Row to become a powerhouse, he needed another superstar. So he decided to go after one of the biggest and most controversial rappers on the West Coast, Tupac. By the mid-90s, Pac was having problems in his career. In 1994, he was shot 5 times in the lobby of Quad Studios in New York City, which is what started his beef with Biggie Smalls and Diddy. Pac always thought Big had set him up and sneak dissed him on the track Who Shot You. Not long after that, Pac was arrested on sexual abuse charges and was sent to Rikers Island while he was recovering from his injury. Around that time, Suge got the idea to invite him to Death Row. He knew signing a major talent like Tupac would make him the biggest label on the West Coast. Tupac also had the perfect image for Death Row, so Suge decided to make Tupac an offer he couldn't refuse. He visited Tupac at Clinton Correctional Facility and offered him a $3.5 million 3-album deal with Death Row written on the napkin. Death Row was also owned by Interscope, so Suge was able to convince the co-founder Jimmy Iovine to sign over his contract. The deal became official on October 4th, 1995, giving Tupac the money he needed to appeal his conviction and post a $1.4 million bail that would get him out of prison. So, Pac was now a free man and the newest artist on the Death Row roster. But it wouldn't take long for things to start going downhill. Right around the time Suge signed Tupac, he was also starting to beef with Diddy and Bad Boy. After their first meeting in August 1995, Suge dissed Puff at the Source Awards and sparked the entire war between the East and West Coast that night. Pac still suspected Big of setting him up to get shot at the studio. So by the time he came home from prison, the East Coast-West Coast beef was going crazy. Suge knew the controversy would help him sell more records, but nobody knew how deadly it would become. Tupac released All Eyes on Me in February 1996, a double album that sold 566,000 copies in the first week. It was the highest-selling album of Tupac's career and is now considered one of the greatest rap albums of all time. Suge had another classic under his belt, but he had no idea that things were about to spiral out of control. The East Coast-West Coast beef continued to heat up, and Suge's legal problems and involvement in the streets started to cause problems at the label. Just months after Death Row signed Tupac, Dre shocked the music industry by walking away from the label he co-founded and starting his own label, Aftermath Records. Dre had been fighting with Suge over the direction of the label. Plus, he must have sensed that Death Row was headed in a bad direction, because only a few months later, Tupac would be dead. On September 7th, 1996, Tupac and Suge got into a brawl with a dude named Orlando Anderson in the lobby of the MGM Grand Hotel in Las Vegas. Anderson was a member of the Southside Compton Crips and had recently been involved in an assault on Trayvon Lane, a mob Paru, and employee of Death Row Records. So when Suge saw Anderson at the MGM Grand, he and his crew decided to jump him. Later that night, while Tupac and Suge were stopped at a traffic light, someone pulled up next to him and started letting off shots. They were both shot, but Suge survived, while Tupac died in the hospital days later. The murder of Tupac was the beginning of the end for Death Row. His death remained unsolved for over 20 years, leading to conspiracy theories about what happened, with Suge in the middle of most of them. In 2023, a member of the Southside Crips named Keefe D was finally arrested in connection with the murder. Keefe D had admitted to his role in the murder in interviews and claimed he was in the car with Orlando Anderson when it happened. In a taped confession, Keefe D claimed that Diddy had paid them $1 million to take out either Tupac or Suge Knight. The case is still ongoing, so the truth about what really happened to Tupac that night is still a mystery. But most people think signing to Death Row and linking up with Suge is what got him killed. Without Tupac and Dre, the label started to fall apart. After Tupac was killed, Suge was arrested for violating his probation and was later sentenced to 9 years in prison in February 1997. In 1995, Suge pleaded no contest to assaulting 2 aspiring rappers at gunpoint and forcing them to strip naked after he caught them using the company phone. So, he was hit with 5 years of probation, which he violated when he jumped Orlando Anderson. To help pay his legal bills and keep the label alive, Suge rushed to release another Tupac album that he was working on right before his death. The Don Illuminati 7-Day Theory was released on November 5th, 1996 and sold 664,000 copies in the first week. Even though it was a commercial success, it got mixed reviews from fans and critics. While some said it was some of Pac's best work, others said it was rushed and seemed like more of a cash grab than a real album. A week later, Snoop dropped his second album, The Dogfather, which sold 479,000 copies in the first week. Even though it still went #1 on Billboard, it didn't live up to the hype of his first album, and many fans and critics consider it a major flop. That was the last record he dropped on Death Row. Snoop was already beefing with Suge before Pac died, and in '97, he left the label and signed to Master P's No Limit Records. So, with Death Row's 3 big artists gone and Suge looking at a long jail sentence, things were looking pretty bad. The label continued for another 10 years and released albums from artists like Daz Dillinger, Lady of Rage, and Michelet. But Death Row never reached the same heights it did in the beginning and was kept alive mostly by dropping unreleased music from Tupac. Suge eventually got out of prison in 2001 and wanted to get back on top of the game. But by that point, most of the original artists had already gotten out of their contracts, and a lot of people didn't want to work with Suge. Suge was sent back to prison in 2003 for violating his probation again, and Death Row's funds started drying up fast. The final nail in the coffin came when Suge and Death Row were forced to declare bankruptcy after owing millions of dollars to creditors and the IRS. In 2002, the label pleaded guilty to tax evasion for failing to pay taxes on $826,000 in income in 1996 alone. Suge agreed to pay the back taxes plus a $100,000 fine, but he was also hit with several other lawsuits. The biggest was when a woman named Lydia Harris sued the label for over $100 million in unpaid royalties. Lydia was the ex-wife of Suge Knight's former business partner, Harry O, the man who helped co-found and finance Death Row from the very start. Lydia claimed she also helped start the label and was entitled to royalties. She ended up winning the lawsuit, which is what finally killed Death Row. By the time Suge declared bankruptcy, the label owed over $107 million to Lydia and Harry O, $6.9 million to the IRS, $2.5 million to Interscope, and even more to other record companies and former artists signed to the label. The rise and fall of Death Row Records is one of the craziest stories in the history of rap. No other label saw that fast of success, only to Self-Destruct within a few years and lose all of its major talent. Over the years, fans have pointed out a few different reasons why Death Row Records fell apart. One is Suge's management style. Suge originally convinced Dre to leave Jerry Heller and Ruthless Records for ownership and creative control of Death Row. But even though Dre was a co-owner, Suge was always the one calling the shots. Suge did give Dre ownership and the creative freedom to create a classic album. That would be a dream come true for most artists. But the situation at Death Row was so bad that Dre still chose to walk away and start his own label instead. After leaving Death Row for No Limit, Snoop said there was a huge difference between how Suge and Master P dealt with artists. He said that Suge made money in rap and that Master P just put his money into rap, and that is a big difference. Snoop also said that it could have been more, but he still made a lot of money with Death Row, and that Suge gave artists what he felt they deserved. At No Limit Records, Master P taught ownership. Snoop said that at Death Row, all of his cars were in Suge's name, but when he was with Master P at No Limit, their cars, houses, and accounts were all in their names, not Master P's, unlike Death Row. Instead of teaching his artists how to get their own bag, Suge wanted total control over the profits so he could get rich. But that was only one of the problems that led to the end of Death Row. Suge clearly had an eye for talent and knew how to promote artists. But Death Row didn't have much success outside of their main 3 rappers, Dre, Snoop, and Tupac. Dre's name was already buzzing in the industry when he met Suge from his days in NWA. He was also the one who discovered Snoop and brought him to the label. Tupac was also already a big name before he signed to Death Row and didn't really need Suge to put him on. After the success of The Chronic and Doggy Style, Suge could have started signing newer artists to be the next generation of Death Row. Instead, he spent a few mil signing Tupac, who was already popping and guaranteed to do numbers. It worked at first, but after Pac was killed, Snoop and Dre left, and nobody was there to hold it down for the label. But Death Row's biggest downfall was all the unnecessary beef, legal issues, and lawsuits that came after Snoop and Dre dipped out. Suge was known to rule with intimidation, and his violent temper created a bad working environment for most artists. DJ Quick, who was signed to Death Row in the mid-90s, described the atmosphere in an interview. He said, "Sometimes it was cool, but then it just became the streets, and that was all the stuff that he wanted to get away from in the first place." DJ Quick said you had to be hood just to deal with them and hold your own. He felt like they were constantly trying to make him scared, and DJ Quick wasn't rocking with all the gangbanging and negative energy while he was just trying to create music. The street image may have given them an advantage in the beginning, but after a while, it started to get dark, especially after the death of Tupac. Suge knew how to use violence and controversy to sell records, but in the end, it cost him his freedom and the life of his biggest artist. He didn't have to throw himself into the beef with Diddy, but Suge knew it would build hype for the label. The move ended up backfiring overall because it turned half the country against him and stopped Death Row from growing outside of California and working with more East Coast artists. Plus, Suge wasn't putting on an act. He and his employees are really about that life, and gang-affiliated people try to bring a street mentality to the business world. But there's only so long that can last before the lawsuits and criminal charges start coming. Death Row was making over $100 million a year at the height of their success, but they were also known for their wild spending. So as soon as they stopped selling records and Suge got locked up, the money dried up quick. But there may still be hope for the future of Death Row. After the label declared bankruptcy in 2006, it was auctioned off to the highest bidder, and the back catalog was passed between a few different companies over the years. Then, in 2022, Snoop Dogg announced that he bought the rights to the Death Row trademarks and planned on reviving the label. A few weeks later, Snoop made it official by dropping an album called BODR, Back on Death Row, which was his first release on the label in 26 years. He also re-signed a few other former Death Row artists, including Corrupt, Daz Dillinger, and their group, The Dog Pound. Since then, he's been working hard to rebuild the label and even tried convincing Ed Sheeran and Russell Crowe to sign to the new label by giving them Death Row chains. But one man who's not happy about Snoop's purchase of Death Row is Suge Knight. In an interview with TMZ from behind bars, Suge claimed that Snoop purchased the label illegally because his former business partner Harry Yo committed bankruptcy fraud to steal the company from him. According to Suge, Death Row was automatically forfeited to a company called MNRK during a bankruptcy hearing after his lawyer failed to show up in court. But Suge believes that the move was illegal and one day he'll take back ownership. Suge said that he settled the judgment in court, but they turned around and said that he never settled it. Suge also claimed that they committed bankruptcy fraud when they filed for bankruptcy in 1995, and it didn't have anything to do with Death Row. Suge said at the end of the day, he is Death Row, and he believes when it's all said and done, All Eyes on Me and Machiavelli will definitely come back to him with everything else. Death Row Records had one of the wildest runs of the 90s and changed the sound of hip-hop forever. Even if the label was never built to last, they still were responsible for releasing timeless music. And if Suge learned his lesson sooner, he could have built the label into a massive empire. Instead, he fumbled the bag and destroyed the legacy of one of the most legendary labels in rap history.